During World War II, Germany invaded and then occupied most of Europe. To win the war, Allied powers would have to take back the invaded countries. They would need to launch an invasion of Europe. Towards the end of 1943, the Allied powers met in Iran. Stalin, whose country had been struggling with the war for several years, was now winning on the Eastern Front. The other two major Allied powers, Great Britain and the United States, were worried that if Stalin continued to push forward against Germany and won the war without help, he could potentially claim all of Europe as part of the Soviet Union. Therefore, an agreement was made that United States and Great Britain would launch an invasion on the Western Front. The Allies decided on Normandy for the launch location and appointed Dwight D. Eisenhower as Supreme Commander of the operation. The invasion would be difficult and would even require new technologies to be invented. Factories would have to produce more planes, landing crafts, and boats. June 4th, 1944 was decided for the date of the launch. On April 22nd, 1944, the Allies began Exercise Tiger to train for the invasion. When the day of the invasion arrived, one thing was holding it back: the weather. The English Channel was being swept by waves and blocked out from the sun by thick thunderclouds. Eisenhower knew the invasion could not begin with the current weather, and a committee of Allied commanders was called to discuss the problem. If the launch were delayed, it would increase the risk of the plans being leaked. The needed tidal conditions would not be the same for 2 weeks, and the Allies could not wait that long. By June 3rd, the Allied weather team concluded that the original date, June 5th, was not going to be fit for the launch.
As historian John C. McManus said, June 5th becomes quickly off the table because of a terrible storm that is coming in, and it's going to make any invasion basically impossible. So Eisenhower, has to postpone it a day, and then he has to sift through dozens of weather reports to ultimately decide on June 6th as kind of an opening in the system that allows weather that's at least good enough while nowhere near ideal.
So it was decided that June 6th would be the date of the launch. Due to a brief opening in the current weather pattern, German forecasters did not have this information because they had few remaining ships in the Atlantic and their weather stations in Greenland had been closed down. This lack of information about the weather, and therefore about the impending invasion, caused many German commanders to leave their posts. With many Germans not guarding, the invasion was launched. 60 miles of coastline was to be invaded, and the Allies divided this area into 5 beaches named Sword, Juno, Gold, Omaha, and Utah. British forces were dominant at Sword and Gold, Canadians at Juno, and Americans at Utah and Omaha, with Omaha experiencing the worst of the fighting. Sword Beach. Sword Beach was the most eastern beach of the 5, and the original D-Day plan did not include landing at Sword. But Generals Eisenhower and Montgomery eventually decided to cover as much beach as they could and planned an attack on Sword. Sword Beach had many obstacles, both natural and man-made. The natural defenses were 2 coral reefs that could prevent or slow landing craft arriving at the beach. The man-made defenses were in the form of heavily fortified German gunners. Most of the soldiers who landed at Sword were British, with some French Navy. This stretch of beach was taken relatively quickly, but the forces encountered trouble when trying to take the nearby city of Caen later on. Juno. The attack on Juno Beach was a joint attack by Canadian and British troops and was led by Canadian leadership. This was not a heavily fortified section of beach, yet the mines and few yet deadly gunners caused heavy losses among the troops landing. Out of the 14,000 Canadian troops who landed, 340 were killed and 600 were wounded. Despite this, troops at Juno managed to go 16 kilometers inland, farther than at any other beach. Gold. British forces landing at Gold Beach were met with the least resistance, as previous bombing raids and paratroopers, along with naval bombardment, had destroyed the strongest of German defenses. 24,970 British troops landed at Gold, and 300 were killed, wounded, or went missing. Utah. Utah was the most western of the beaches and was separated from the other beaches by thick marshes. This caused confusion among the paratroopers the previous night, with many of them missing their landing points and most memorably, one paratrooper getting caught in a church building. This beach was a priority so that the troops could move on to take the key port of Cherbourg. Many of the American-led forces landing at Utah missed their landing points, but this turned out well, as they met little resistance at the accidental beaches. Omaha. American forces landing at Omaha experienced the worst fighting of all the beaches. Previous bombing raids and paratroopers failed at destroying key German positions, and tanks did not make it to Omaha. American troops landing at Omaha were decimated by the German machine gun fire, but eventually a small group of soldiers made it up the beach and destroyed the German positions from behind.
The success of D-Day marked the beginning of the end for Hitler and the Nazis. Allied reinforcements came in shortly after D-Day, and on June 26, 1944, they captured the French port of Cherbourg. As planned, D-Day forced the Germans to fight a two-front war, again just as they had in World War I. Yet again, the Germans could not handle a war on both sides of them. The Allied forces quickly advanced across Europe towards Berlin, and on April 30th, 1945, Hitler committed suicide, marking the end of the war in Europe. Through the horrors of what happened on the beaches of Normandy, the Allies were successful in defeating the Nazis and ending the terror they brought upon Europe. Through tragedy, a triumph.